So hi, I go by Sephi, and I like to research about random topics. So today we're going to be talking about sexual repression and the taboo of sex. Initially, I wanted to talk specifically about how the East is often appointed as more sexually repressed than the West, especially with acculturation, and how studies have found that overall higher mainstream acculturation is associated with greater sexual openness, whereas greater heritage acculturation is linked to greater sexual conservatism. So this means that greater mainstream acculturation or westernization was associated with less sex guilt, which was associated with greater sexual desire, more sexual openness, high sexual functioning, and less sex guilt. But further research has led me to reading about the topic more philosophically, and I came to find that it is a very nuanced topic. So I will be covering it quite broadly in this video. In the Reddit thread, what were some of the societies that were not sexually repressed? In r/ask anthropology, a user wrote, think of it this way: if you grew up in a society where no one ever had oral sex and no one ever talked about it as an option, but otherwise the society was absolutely fine about non-marital sex and quite open about sex as part of life, are you repressed because you've never had oral sex? Do you feel repressed because you can't have sex with animals? Do you want a society where everyone masturbates in public? If not, is that a sign of sexual repression? No. Sexual pleasure is just as socially constructed as the rules are. So this makes me think, what determines sexual repression? Is not being sexually liberated to do whatever we want considered sexual repression? To answer the question, in my opinion, we must examine how ethics and morals falls into place. So for example, negative utilitarianism often appoints something as morally good as something that does not bring suffering to other beings. Thus, if sexual conduct of the society makes people of that community suffers, that considers them as being sexually repressed. But if you follow the morals and ethics guided by God, a guide of intuitive principles that generally leads to the best circumstances, it requires no further weighing of pros and cons, so whatever sexual conducts have been written out should be followed. If we think more critically and apply our own moral principles, I think most of us can agree that having sex with other species is somewhat wrong. So then that leads to the question, does that mean that we have to define sexual repression as rules and regulations that prohibits the acts and disclosure of information of sexual pleasure that are within human morals and ethics? So what is sexual repression based on? Who classifies what is sexual repression and what is not? With that, you can really ask that same question for everything. Who decide what is a normal norm and what is not? The commenter wrote that sexual pleasure is a socially constructed phenomenon, thus the degree to which the person is sexually repressed is affected by the culture and environment which they were born into. This is a belief based on ethical relativism, where morality is relative to the norms of the individual and the culture. Thus, it's difficult to say whether one country is more repressed than the other without setting a universal norm, which we often set as the West. I can't say whether I think this is right or wrong, so I can only go through this topic broadly. This does not intend to go into the philosophy of sexual conducts around the world. Rather, I wanted to learn about the different ways our societies have repressed sexual desires and information over time, and also in different culture. So let's start with some definitions. Sexual repression is repression of sexual desire or sexual instincts by others or by oneself is the definition that we will go with for today. And that is influenced by culture, the rearing environment, innate sexual drive, and gender, body image, and romantic relationship. And it can be represented as a lack of sexual attraction, disinterest or distress with sexual activities, guilt or other negative feelings after having sex or engaging in sexual activities, hiding and restraining sexual impulses. However, it can also be watching erotic novel, watching porn, and engaging in kinky contents, and masturbation as coping mechanisms for not having a sexual relationship with others. This causes a type of cognitive dissonance and causes guilt and shame. So let's talk about the West. The history of sexual exploitation starts in the 17th century, the beginning of an age of the bourgeoisie societies, which Michel Foucault wrote in the History of Sexuality, Volume 1. Without even having to pronounce the word, modern prudishness was able to ensure that one did not speak of sex merely through the interplay of prohibitions that referred back to one another. Instances of muteness, which by dint of saying nothing, impose silence, censorship. Since this time, it was taboo to discuss sex to maintain propriety as part of a moral etiquette, and the topic was discussed in secrecy and with tact and carefulness. There are boundaries that must be crossed, and you must teach the young one without actually teaching them. It is a topic that must be tread on thin ice. Areas were thus established, if not of utter silence, at least of tact and discretion, between parents and children, for instance, or teachers and pupils, or masters and domestic servants. Madison Brown made a video going quite in depth about the Western's changing perspective of on sexual freedom dating back to the 1800s, if anyone's interested in the history of this. So Christianity often advocates for no sex before marriage. That is, any form of sexual activities outside of marriage is sinful. There are many passages in the Bible that herald this message. For example, in 1 Corinthians 6:18, Paul wrote, "Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body." Depending on the sources, one's body belongs to God, that is interpreted as physically belonging to Him, or Christ is with your body, or that you have a spiritual connection with Christ. Therefore, to sin by having sex with another person would be to sin with God's body. It is a sin because it is inconsistent with the value of family and marriage, causes teen pregnancy and illegitimacy, STI, and leads to issues of trust and jealousy. To sin with the body is to sin at a deep level. So Paul wrote that one must run away from sexual immorality to get rid of sexual temptations. An analysis of this verse on Bible Riff wrote, Paul did not write that sexual immorality is the worst of all sins, as we sometimes conclude. Instead, he is combating the casual attitude towards sexual sin carried by some Christians in hypersexualized cultures. In addition to hurt others, sexual immorality contributes to our own deep pain. It's no more or less a sin than any other, but human cultures tend to treat it more casually than other errors. I think that the Christian value of sex before marriage is often made fun of by the youngsters because of a few different reasons. For example, radical Christian missionaries often try to push this value of onto non-Christian believers, and also young people often reject strict religious structures that have been pushed onto them by the family. Like, I know that for myself. In early high school, I was definitely that kid that went against familial values and beliefs and aligned myself towards atheism and agnosticism.
Don't have sex, because you will get pregnant and die.
Abstinence-only sex education is where students are taught to not have sex until marriage, and abstain from sexual activities to avoid pregnancy and STIs. In a history of abstinence only until marriage, funding by Siakis 2019 found that beginning in 1981, under the Reagan administration, the federal government has consistently funded abstinence only until marriage programs, despite an overwhelming body of research proving that they're ineffective and fail to achieve their stated goals. Funding for these unproven programs grew exponentially from 1996 until 2006, particularly during the years of the George W. Bush administration. The funding leveled out between 2006 and 2009, and then was reduced significantly in 2010. In 2018, Trump proposed budgeting $277 million in new funding for abstinence-only education. Between 1996 and federal fiscal year 2018, Congress has funneled over $2.2 billion in taxpayer dollars into abstinence-only until marriage programs, and that funding continues today. However, many studies have shown that abstinence education do not delay sexual activities or reduce unwanted pregnancies and STIs like its intended purpose. The main problem with this program is literally that it prevents an open discussion of such an important topic such as sex education. Young people are not provided the medically accurate information that they need in order to make informed decisions when engaging in sexual intercourses, if that is what they're interested in. In the content of federally funded abstinence-only education programs, it was discovered that 11 out of 13 abstinence-only curricula contained false and misleading information. This includes information such as, in heterosexual sex, condoms fail to prevent HIV approximately 31% of the time, and when used by real people in real-life situations, research confirms that 14% of the women who use condoms scrupulously for birth control become pregnant within a year. And that sterility studies show that 5 to 10% of women will never again be pregnant after having a legal abortion. But actually, research have shown that when used appropriately and correctly, contraception such as the pills has a 92 to 97% effective rate. That means that out of 100 people, 92 to 97% will not get pregnant while using the pill. And although the rate is lower with condoms at 78 to 82%, when used in combination, it proves to be much more effective at preventing pregnancy. Many of these policies and campaigns effectively work against the LGBTQ community, as the language they use promote gender stereotypes which prevent self-expression and are heteronormative, which prevent the practice of safe sex. Also, the idea that sex is exclusive to marriage can cause shame for people living in places where gay marriage is illegal. So now we'll go on into talking about the Soviet Union. During the Soviet Union, the old bourgeoisie morality was replaced with the communist morality, which focuses on ridding society of such undesirable phenomena such as depravity and prostitution, to have reinforced the institution of family, and to have decreased both the divorce rate and the incidence of venereal diseases. The Khrushchev era, 1956 to 1964, was the time of enacting devotion to society and communism. This introduces openness to issues pertaining sexuality, gender, and the family. However, the Stalinist approach towards sex education, which sought to prevent children and adolescents from obtaining any information about sex, was still dominant.
They said to me, "How could you, a respectable married woman and a hard worker, blurt out this shameful word? Not to say it, but to blurt out. What were you thinking? How could you fall into the trap set up by those Americans?" And I thought, what trap are they talking about? I was defending my country. All I said was, we have no sex. But it was true. Officially, no one ever talked about sex.
Manual on family life and sex education were written by physicians such as Stankov, Zalkin, and Atarov. Particularly, Atarov wrote about healthy environments could prevent young children from early sexual maturing, and if parents allowed themselves to demonstrate excessive affection to one another in front of their children, this might infringe on the moral development of their offspring, and that young people who worked in restaurants or cafes were particularly susceptible to premarital liaisons and the unhealthy awakening of sexual feelings. But of course, the environment you live in matters, so some families are more open to than others, and will communicate about the topic to their children more openly and effectively. So Asia is considered more conservative compared to the West, and this is also seen in sexual desires. These conservative attitudes often lead to reticence to communicate about sexual and reproductive issues, hindering attempts to promote sex education or contraceptive knowledge, which can heighten the risk for sexually transmitted diseases, unintended pregnancy, induced abortion, and emotional problems. I wanted to talk about this point as I feel that in Asian society we often follow the masses due to our collectivist culture. So that is one that's based on valuing the needs of a group or a community over the individual. In collectivist culture, viewpoints that are held are often easily influenced by the surrounding environment. But I guess it's not our fault either, since it's been ingrained in our teaching for so long to just follow what is taught and not to question. And even in school, you aren't really taught to be individuals and have individual thinking, so that you don't question anything. Basically, you follow the crowd and you don't stand out. Although this culture has begun to change a lot more, it still feels like it is a very rooted part of our culture. Linking back to this theory, I feel like sexual desire isn't expressed because it's taboo to speak of, and dare anyone stand out among the crowd. Typically, traditional Asian culture is especially against promiscuity. I think it is better in the younger generation, but I needed to point this out. Buddhist teaching also emphasized the need for restraint of sexual desire. To become a monk or a nun, you must follow the path of celibacy or brahmacharya. that is abstaining from not only sexual relations but also marriage and partnership. With love, not only does it bring the complexity of jealousy, lust, emotional turbulence, but also to love is to receive pleasure, and this goes against the Buddhist principle of non-attachment. This is the third of the 5 precepts followed by Buddhist monks and nuns, which states to refrain from sexual misconduct. But this is not necessarily practiced for lay Buddhists, that is, those who are not monastics, meaning that they can marry, fall in love, and have children. In Guide to Buddhism A to Z by Banti, a person trying to develop mental calm and clarity through meditation may find this a hindrance to their practice and choose to minimize it by becoming celibate at least for certain periods. Thus, Buddhism's advocacy for celibacy is not only because it sees sex as dirty, animalistic, or sinful, but for purely practical reasons. Similar to Paul's advice to flee from sexual immorality, the Samyutta Nikaya, a Buddhist scripture, provide practical help to deal with sexual desire. So 1 is to think of unpleasant aspects of the body. 2, consciously avoid situations that arouse sensual desire. 3, to develop the mother mind, sister mind, or daughter mind. This refers to trying to think about and relate to any female according to her age, as if she were one's mother, one's sister, or one's daughter. Women could of course develop the father mind, brother mind, or son mind. There are apparently records from both East and Western monks and priests actually mutilating their sexual organs because they can't control themselves. A story in Vinaya tells of such a monk who eventually cut off in despair at his sexual urges. When the Buddha was informed of this, they commented, "This foolish man cut off one thing when he could have cut off another, the desires and fantasies, rather than the organ that responds to them. He then made it an offense to mutilate oneself for any reason." What is quite respectable is that Buddhism aimed to release all types of cravings and desires, including monetary, fame, and power. Having desires lead to suffering. The teaching includes detaching from materialistic things and to achieve peace. Actually quite similar to Stoicism in that regard. So depending on how deeply you follow religious teachings, that affect your view on sexual attraction and desire. East Asians view sexuality as being reserved for marriage and procreation. Li Yinhe wrote that in China, until 1997, sex before marriage was actually illegal and could be prosecuted as hooliganism. In 1996, the owner of a bathhouse was sentenced to death for organizing prostitution. And publishers of pornography could also be sentenced to death in 1980s, as could those who organized sex parties. A woman could be arrested for having sex with more than one man, and obviously premarital sex was forbidden. There are still criminal laws that exist against sexual practices such as prostitution as a business is still illegal, but people don't get punished for providing or receiving sex. Writing of sex novels led to 6 months of criminal detention for one person, and in 2014, organizing an online sex party led to 3 months of sexual detention. Studies comparing the sex drive and sex guilt of East Asian women compared to European women found that East Asian women has more sex guilt, and those who were more sexually conservative reported lower sexual desire. The number of women stating lower sexual desire were nearly twice as high from East Asia compared to European countries. Sex guilt has been defined as a generalized expectancy for self-mediated punishment for violating or for anticipating violating standards of proper sexual conduct. Such a disposition might be manifested by resistance to sexual temptations, by inhibited sexual behavior, or by the disruption of cognitive processes in sex-related situations. For example, I am an immoral person for wanting sex, or that it is wrong for a woman to initiate sexual activity. So I want to talk more about Asian stereotypes and pop culture. With typical Asian culture and education teaching people to be more reserved and non-assertive, and with women in Asian culture specifically being forced to be in the role of the good daughter or wife, an Asian woman tends to have this stereotype of being innocent and pure. Thus, women who express her sexual needs are considered as whores. Additionally, because the role of the mother is to protect her youth, it makes sense that due to the societal expectation and the possibility of pregnancy, they would not want to teach girls about sex education or for fear of ruining their purity, exposing them to being taken advantage of, and the impacts of social ostracization of being a teen mom. The innocent Asian stereotypes all leads to a patronizing way of addressing Asian women and girls. Yaska Asada wrote, further, the use of words such as innocent, pure, shy, though not used maliciously, felt rather patronizing and dismissive, insinuating I had to be more sexually active to reach to be a mature adult, talking to me as if I didn't know about the world and that sex was so vital to do so. I was spoken to as if I had to be taught to be more open. Also, words such as pure triggered me due to their origins and connotations regarding women's sexual activity and virtue. Even the term lose your virginity has connotation of losing something, when it's more like gaining your sexuality. The study by Rong Wong and Epperson compiled many interesting findings about different countries' procedures and restrictions on sex, or rather lack thereof. For example, in traditional Turkish society, if there's any suspicion about virginity, the young girl are then forced to undergo hymen examination against their will. The practice is frequently reported and often results in attempted suicide. However, it's important to note that since the study was written a decade ago, the sources are from like the 1990s and 2000s, so these practices may be prohibited in nowadays. I feel like I can't truly fully cover this topic if I don't talk about the Kama Sutra, so let's talk about it briefly. The Kama Sutra translates to teachings on desire. Kama is also the name of the god of erotic love, but it's often known as a book about various sex positions. As I researched, I find that it's just being a sex book. It's actually a misconception that we often have. That's only 1 out of the 7 books, actually. Aside from the sexual positions, they also cover themes of love, the art of living, the nature of love, finding partners, maintaining sex lives, personal grooming and etiquette in the marriage world, and family affair, practices of arts, and even homosexuality. Basically, a self-help book of the 3rd century. The thing that intrigued me was that the book is an ancient Indian Hindu Sanskrit text, but modern day India is quite conservative. So how can this be? In the video Kama Sutra, a misunderstood ancient Erotic Manual by BBC, Professor Madhavi Menon attributes this to British colonialism and the Hindu caste system, which emphasizes on purity and the segregation of all things deemed impure. This leads to the eradication of anything that doesn't fit the British heterosexual system of thinking, such as the third gender, the hijra, and cross-dressing, and to put in place rules that reinforces gender stereotypes. Now the book is actually considered a dirty book by members of modern conservative Hindu.
Mostly known as hijras, given high positions in Mughal courts, considered auspicious in all kinds of religious functions and ceremonies. And the British come in and say, what on earth is this? How can men dress as women? And so they passed a law called the Criminal Tribes Act. And they said anybody dressing not in their gender conforming clothing in public is liable to be arrested. And that's just one of many examples of how the British criminalized anything and everything that they saw as not conducing to reproductive heterosexuality.
So then this made me think of the industry of porn and hentai. Asia is such a conservative culture, so why do we have such a large industry in this field? So hentai is pretty wild. From lolicon to tentacle porn, its creator can be pretty imaginative. A lot of what I've read blame Japan's sexually suppressed society to lead to such creations. The teaching of maintaining chastity, reserving it for after marriage, also leads people to engage in porn and hentai. Additionally, other factors such as the intense work culture of Japan can leave people no time to engage in romance. And because it was so technologically advanced, porn and hentai, sex toys, sex dolls, virtual erotic games are within reach and so much easier to access than having to build an intimate relationship with a person. Paxu made a video on hentai stating that with the danger of hentai is that it can draw in younger age groups with its cartoonish and animated styles. As children are curious, this can lead to more consumption of such content and lead to addiction from a young age. As children start to use their electronic devices at a younger age, they're more likely to be exposed to pornography. And this could be how the child starts learning about sex and such things as sex toys and fetishes. For a young person with underdeveloped brain, they might not be able to critically examine the media they're consuming. So pornography, sexualized images may reinforce harmful gender stereotypes, leads to children forming unhealthy and sexist views of women and sex, and lead to violence against women. And it also contributes to an unrealistic understanding of sex and sexuality. This could be the dominant male and passive female stereotype, with things such as once aroused, men cannot control themselves, or that women say no when they mean yes, and that women often play hard to get, and that it's men's role to pursue a woman. This treats women as sexual objects. Physical aggression such as slapping, choking, gagging, and hair pulling, and verbal aggressions such as name calling, it's also predominantly done by men to their female partners in pornography. With such, pornography can be used to shape sexual practices and often has unsafe sexual health practices such as not using condoms and unsafe anal and vaginal sex. The risk of children falling for sexual schemes and predators online as they are curious and don't have a good understanding of the negative consequences of it is also possible. Pornography does not allow children to explore their sexualities based on mutual desire and respect. It also does not encourage relationship building and character development. Rather, pornography strives to have its consumer see people as objects to dominate. The best approach for parents, caregivers, and teachers responding to children's exposure to pornography is to encourage open communication, discussion, and critical thinking on the part of children while educating themselves about the internet and social media. With the porn industry, women can be taken advantage of through scouting agency, such as in Japan, and a large number of fake modeling and idol agency and their off-street scouting. The Japan Reporter made a really good video on this titled The Dark Side of Japan's Porn Industry, where they talked about how this could happen and the lasting impact the side of the industry have on many women. So I do recommend to check that out. Additionally, it could also be their partner. I remember a story from the K-drama Witch at Court in episode 3, which has a court case revolving around revenge porn, where this guy has been taking photos and videos of his girlfriend and use hidden spy cams when they're having sex, and then post it on porn websites or send to distributors to make money. What's even more crazy to me is there are people exploiting refugees trying to leave war by helping them in exchange for prostitution, or in case where there are cases where they're just forced into it. The article by Riz Myung 2022 to call pornography a public health issue is not enough when it is a public health crisis. A multi-survivor analysis goes into great detail about this issue and the psychological relationship between trauma survivor and pornography. So I do recommend to read that too. It's hard to say because there are also issues of money where people have no other way of gaining money, so they have resorted to this without understanding the long-term consequence of it. In the thread, The Mindset of an Asian Woman Who Pursued Pornography in r/ask anthropology, a deleted user wrote, "We don't understand her life situation, whether she's a single mother, a college student who chose the wrong degree, and is now in thousands of dollars in debt, has a bad police record that makes her unemployable, etc. I'm not going to assume her life is fine and dandy enough for her to afford to just take up any McDonald's job and be able to survive. Bottom line, I don't know anything about these girls, how good or how bad their life scenarios are." Additionally, porn categories perpetuate stereotypes of the submissive Asian woman, or the aggressive black man, or the hypersexualized black woman. I also wanted to cover some things on kinks and fetishes too, but there's not conclusive evidence in this field regarding its origin. People say that it could be conditioned, like conditioning a normal object to sexual image, or conditioning a normal experience into a pleasure experience. It could also be misfunctioning brain chemistry. I've also read that it develops when you're sexually repressed in your youth or experiences of sort. But because of the inconclusive evidence, I'll leave it like that. But please send me any articles or videos regarding this topic that's interesting. But I do want to know the shame and stigma of porn addiction. And just like any other addiction, if you don't put something in place to stop, it's hard to quit. Even if you know it's bad, you fall back into this habitual cycle. And since porn is so stigmatized, people feel ashamed to open up about it and seek help. Porn can cause your dopamine level to elevate and increase the baseline dopamine, thus causing you to need more porn to satisfy this new baseline, and real experiences may not feel as satisfying or meaningful. You may also have certain expectations of what you believe is the appropriate response. For example, with sexual orgasm, and the same can be said with body image. Porn makes you think that your body is abnormal or not beautiful, when the people in these pornography are models and are on site because they are extra beautiful. And for underdeveloped children, they can have an increased levels of self-objectification and body surveillance due to their underdeveloped sexual organs. Thus, it is important for sex education to teach people that sex is not the same for everyone, and that everyone has different figures and body parts and they're all normal. Dr. K, or Healthy Gamer GG, made a good point about OnlyFans, as he states that with this essentially evolved version of pornography, as you're now interacting with person you're lusting for, this connection feels real to you and creates a parasocial relationship which prey on people who are lonely and need connection as well, besides the sexual tension, both increasing dopamine and cravings. I think the show Sex Ed is literally quite transformative. When it first came out, it stirred quite a buzz due to how explicit it was. This show is incredibly life-changing when it comes to the way they approach sexual topics. It provides a safe space for young people to explore and learn about sex and also normalize different experiences and people's unique body parts. I think the main criticism that I do have on it is that the experiences it portrays, while very real to some, is not to others, and this could cause feelings of disconnections. Despite that, I think it's important to learn about the topics the show covers to have a broader worldview and knowledge. And more Yvonne wrote in the New Lines magazine, I realized the extent of this silencing about sexuality only when one of the women on the table shared just how little she knew about sex until the day she got married. Even then, on the night of her wedding, when she asked her mother what to expect, she was told, just do whatever your husband say. She was 16 at the time. I feel like Asian children were often taught to fear sex, and adults often are scared to tell them about it. It is seen as something dirty and forbidden. Like, why did you find out about it? Now we have to kind of touch on the topic without actually telling you anything about it. The talk, the dreaded talk. I've actually never had like a proper talk about it. Like they wanted to talk to me about it, but then just didn't know how to approach the topic, or like maybe they did talk about it, but I just don't understand enough to like comprehend what they were saying. Regardless, I did get the talk. Like as a kid, I just thought that like children came from marriage, and like when two adults kiss, a baby is born, like some kind of ritual. I feel like with sex, a common experience as a kid whose parents are conservative about it is that you're just supposed to know or learn about it yourself as you go through life. In the Australian curriculum when I was in high school, you're taught about human reproduction, like the egg and sperm, but not anything about like emotional and chemical aspects of sex, and obviously God forbid anything to do with orgasm or masturbation. That was for your parents to teach you, parents who may not be educated to teach in the sphere, and they literally only taught it in like grade 7 or 8, so I was like 12 to 14-year-old, and you don't cover it again because other subjects took over as being more important. But at this age, I was still very naive, so I didn't understand the topic that much and was honestly not that interested or like see the importance of the topic at the time. But even as embarrassing as people say the talk is, it's important for children to know about it, and it also prevents certain dangers to the child, such as misconceptions, like the vagina hymen remains intact until it's broken during vaginal penetration as a marker of virginity. A lack of sex education otherwise leads many in South Asia to believe that once a girl gets a period, she is ready for marriage. There's also stigma about using contraceptive and abortion, which leads to teens making fun of other teens. I feel like as children, you don't really know how to express concerns about sexual health and with your own body, and also like expressing feelings and emotions and sexual desire and pleasure. This all affects like your identity and the people that you're attracted to. and so doesn't tell you how to recognize red flags and sexual advances that are appropriate and inappropriate. Chantal Contos wrote in The Guardian, by positioning sex as a shameful act, purity culture ignores teenage girls' own sexual desire and instead makes them pawns in the system seeking to corrupt them. It's hard to shake this thought shame, and it often stays with the person throughout womanhood. Anyways, let's just end it here, otherwise I'll be doing the research forever. So some final words. I think that primary healthcare should be teaching family to talk about sexual health and debunking myths and stigma such as subjects around teen pregnancy and gay sex. And it's important to get sexual health checks and also get tested, like there are free testing at uni if that's something available in your country. And teaching in school should be more repetitive and not just a one-time thing, and it should also invite speakers or have like health nurses or counselor talk about it, and that's like including subjects such as contraception, testing, consent, alcohol, and just a more comprehensive sex education. It's also important to know like the difference between the biological system and chemical system of female and male when they sleep together and have sex, and also talk about like abusive relationship and how to spot that red flags. In general, we just need more critical thinking about pornography when it's viewed and the messages that is expressed. I was scrolling through pages and pages of Google search about people's experience with the talk, but mainly I found that like parents ask for advice on it. So here's something that I feel like is important to point out. So it is important to be honest and factual. It's a normal biological process, and when you approach the topic from like an educational and compassionate point of view, it's easy to talk about. And it's important to not scare kids about it and also not romanticizing it. Obviously, there are positives and negatives of having sex. Gaska brought up a good point regarding stereotypical men's lack of understanding for women's sexual health regarding women's contraceptive and the side effects of these, because they think it's the woman's job to worry about their own health. But it's important to help each other out with this thing if you're planning on having sex with your partner. And it's important to teach boys about this because the responsibility shouldn't be placed entirely on the woman, and both parties should be engaging in contraceptive and also testing. A final word from Yaska Sahara: one does not need to be sexually active to be sexually open and aware. Okay, so thank you for watching. This probably like my 4th time filming this, and it's not even perfect because I wish I was more presentable in a way, and I just need to like put this video out there. But yeah, let me know what you think about this down below, and let's keep growing and learning together.